If asking for clients feels like you're shouting out into the void and hearing nothing back but echoes, you may be complicating the process. In this week's Hot Seat episode, Jonathan shares a presentation he's given where he helps coaches simplify getting clients, hiring help, and getting referrals. You'll learn how to approach problem solving, the trick to choosing the right clients to serve, and how you're asking questions wrong. I'll be back at the end to recommend another episode. Enjoy.
So, like I said, this is a presentation that I gave, that I've given a few times now and seems to have gone over well. And I'm excited to give it to you all as well. And we can talk about anything, of course, in a little bit more detail. The idea of this presentation was to be able to provide you with just an easier way to get more clients, to get more referrals, and also to hire the right team. So it's not a lot of time to do it, but I'm hoping that I can simplify it with you. So the story starts with a baby, and this is my baby. This is Jaden when he was much younger than he is now, and that's me behind him doing my dad pose, like all dads do, sleeping behind their baby. But the reason that I show this is because in 2007, there was an MBA team at Stanford University. And this team was tasked with building baby incubators at 1% the cost in order to help prenatal babies live in developing countries. A baby incubator generally costs $25,000. They were tasked with making them at 1% the price. And so they did what you would expect them to do. They hired materials experts to try to get the cost of materials down. They hired logistics experts, engineers, to try to get the transportation costs, to try to build efficiencies wherever they could logistically in order to bring the cost of these things down as much as they possibly could. And they did. They did get the cost down pretty significantly. And then near the end of the project, they went to Nepal. And when they were in Kathmandu, they were visiting a hospital. One of the things they noticed at this hospital was that there was a whole bunch of baby incubators that were already there, and they were empty. And so they asked one of the doctors, they said, yo, what's going on? We've been busting our butt trying to make these things cheaper because we were told that you couldn't afford the ones, as many as you need. And now we get here and we see you have plenty of baby incubators and they're not even being used. What's going on? What are we missing? And as the story goes, one of the nurses chimed in and she said, the problem is not that we don't have baby incubators. The problem is not that we can't afford them. The problem is that a lot of the women in this area live in faraway rural villages. Those villages often have a tiny medical clinic that doesn't have any power or electricity. And in order for them to travel to the hospital, takes a day or longer. And even if they could afford that trip, many of the babies died en route. The problem is not the incubators. It's not how smart you are, it's how you're smart. So before you try harder, you got to make sure that you're on the right path. Before you work on a solution, you need to make sure that you understand the problem. So what's the problem here? Because at this point, this group started to ask a different set of questions. The question that they were tasked with is, how do we build cheaper baby incubators? The question that they then asked is, yo, how do baby incubators actually keep a baby alive? And what they found out very quickly is that the vast majority of all of the function that a baby incubator does is it keeps a prenatal baby's temperature in and around almost exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's basically what a baby incubator does. And so hospitals didn't need incubators. Remote medical clinics needed a way to keep babies warm without electricity. So then the group, tasked with a better question of, yo, how do we keep these babies warm, started to think, okay, well, you're camping out in the middle of wherever. You don't have electricity. How do you keep warm? Well, the answer is a sleeping bag. And so what this project turned into is a phenomenal organization called Embrace Global. Embrace Global has one product. It's the Embrace Infant Warmer. It's effectively a sleeping bag with a pouch. Now, this pouch has been chemically designed to be able to be heated in a pot of water over a flame, no electricity, and maintain its temperature at exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. and can be reused hundreds of times. The Embrace infant warmer costs $20. So not 1% of 25,000, 0.01% of 25,000. And to date, it's helped over 700,000 babies in the developing world survive. I bring up the story to show you that perspective is everything and that spreadsheet-driven ideas are often a misguided default. This idea of blunt force, doing more of the same thing that isn't working, just better or harder or faster, it results in insular thinking. This idea that, oh, I just need a bit, I just need better production value on my videos. I just need to figure out what's missing from my content or whatever it is. I'm not saying that that's not necessarily the answer for you, but it's also not necessarily the answer. The reason why we feel like we should do a lot of these things is because everybody else is doing them. It's because it's in our face. It's because it's what we see. It's not necessarily the best way to build our businesses. And so we need to think outside of that, because injecting our existing biases often shields us from elegant truths. So let's do this a little bit differently this time. Actually, turn on your mic. I'm going to ask two people. What year do you think Gandhi was born? If you've heard me give this example on the podcast, don't answer. But what year do you think Gandhi was born in? Jonathan, what do you think?
I was there for this, so maybe you don't want me to say.
You weren't at the event, were you? Okay, Jane, what
I
year
was
was
at the
Gandhi born?
event. You used this example before.
I've used it on podcast. Okay, Jane, what year do you think Gandhi was born in?
I'm ashamed to say I don't know, and I'm really tempted to Google it.
Give me a guess.
I have no idea.
I'll tell you the answer afterwards.
I
Okay.
literally don't even know where to start it. It's
Okay.
like forever.
So let me ask you a different question then. Let me ask you a different question, MJ. If I were to ask you, what year do you think the earliest year that he was born in? And then what year do you think the latest that he could have been born in? Like, what's the range? What would you say?
No, that's like, seriously, mate, that's a grown-up question. I don't know.
Give me your range. Anything.
100 years ago.
Okay. Very cool. Scott, what do you think?
I would say 1900 to 1930.
Okay.
If that you went earliest to latest.
Earliest to latest. All right. Thank you. So the reason that I asked that question is not because I care that you know what year Gandhi was born in. That's completely irrelevant. This isn't Tuesday night trivia at Trixie's Cantina. It doesn't matter what year Gandhi was born. I mean, I guess if you're a historian, it does. The reason that I asked that question is because I think that it's really, really important to admit our ignorance around a subject. Because it's only when we admit our ignorance around a subject that we can then appropriately tackle it. And so Gandhi was born in 1869 is the answer. But again, I don't care if you know when Gandhi was born in. What matters in terms of the question is how wide your bands were. So Jane, you did a really good job answering that question. Because you said, I have no idea. And you were confident enough, even with me asking you over and over again, to say, yo, I have no idea. And then you gave me a pretty wide band. Most people, when asked this question, actually give very, very tight bands. And what's also particularly interesting is that generally, and this is not everybody, but generally, the older we get and the more we learn and the more successful we become, the tighter our bands become. In fact, when this question is asked to college students, they give really wide bands. When this question is asked to executives at large companies, they give bands of 10, 20, 30 years. if you don't actually know when he's born, and somebody would ask you, what's the range? You could say, I don't know, the year 1600 to yesterday. You would be correct. You'd be correct. He was born within that range. And so what I really encourage you to do is expand your bands, is admit when you don't know something, and most things in this world are unknowable, and to expand your bands. The question is not, how do I make better content on Instagram to get clients? Because those are pretty thin bands, aren't they? Those are pretty constricted bands, aren't they? The question is, y'all, I got to get some clients. How do I do that? Because when you ask the second question, what you can do is you can start to go outside of that window that everybody else is looking at, and perhaps find a more eloquent solution to the problem. Because complex problems really don't require complex solutions most of the time. I'll give you just one example. I'm going to fly through the other ones because I'm making this presentation shorter than how I normally give it. The TTC where I live in Toronto was our subway system. They needed to make basically the subway system better. And so they could have done a few things, right? They could have put more trains on the track. They could have engineered more efficient trains. They could have built a better schedule for the trains, done all of these studies. But you know what they did? They did none of those things. They put a countdown clock at every station that told you how long it was going to be for the next train to come. That's all that they did, because they understand the psychology of the matter, which is that somebody is willing to wait for 10 minutes if they know that that wait is going to be 10 minutes. But a 3-minute wait, if we don't know how long that wait is going to be, is torture. It's a much simpler solution to a very complex problem. There's a few other examples that I have here, but we don't need to get into them. These stats are from 2020 or 2022. The pharmaceutical, vitamin, and supplement industries was worth $660 billion. The health, fitness, and gym industries combined was worth $30 billion. That's insane. There's no reason that reactive health should be worth 21 more times than preventive health. When I see stats like this, my first reaction is often to get really, really upset and bang my head against the wall. My second reaction is to say, why does that happen? Because if I understand why that happens, and the realities of the situation and the truths of the situation, I can perhaps figure out a better way to navigate the world with that information. I might decide that I don't want to do anything about it. I might decide that I want to bitch and moan about it. But the most important thing is to try to understand why a thing is a thing. Because if you don't understand the rules of the game, you can't figure out how to play the game. And so, why is this? I think there's two reasons. And it really comes down to this sentence. Prevention can't be measured in the moment. The result, an awkward void. In response, we add needless complexity to give us the comforting illusion of control, right? Robert Weinberg, who's one of the lead researchers in cancer worldwide, one of the most important researchers, he said, persuading somebody to quit smoking is a psychological exercise. It has nothing to do with molecules and genes and cells. And so people like me are essentially uninterested in it. Think about that for a minute. This is a guy who's one of the leading researchers on cancer in the world, and he's straight up admitting that the work that he does is much less important than prevention, but prevention is simply not interesting to him. Now, this isn't downplaying the importance of the work that doctors and physicians and researchers like Dr. Weinberg do, but I think it's pretty telling. And this goes down, Shane, into what we were talking about a little bit earlier, about this search for individual intellectual stimulation. A lot of the time, when we actually get to the point where something starts working for us, we add needless complexity and we overcomplicate it again. Because once it becomes easy, once it starts working, it becomes less intellectually stimulating. But the second comes down into prestige and rewards. And I think it's best defined by this quote. If there is not the war, you don't get the great general. by Theodore Roosevelt. If there's not the war, you don't get the great general. If you do something like a public health effort and you stop people from smoking, and those people don't get sick or cancer 20 years down the road, you don't really know. You can't really accurately correlate these things to the point where you can reward somebody when they're doing the work, can you? Even though it's probably going to be much more impactful. Herein lies the problem of preventative wellness. There isn't a problem. There isn't a pain. Now, anybody that you ask logically and you say, hey, what would you prefer? Doing something today to make sure you don't get sick, to make sure you're not in pain, to make sure you don't get overweight, to make sure you don't get cancer, so that you never have to deal with it in the future. Or what's behind door number 2, you get cancer and then we try to fix you, but you have to suffer for a couple years. Everybody is going to tell you that they're going to choose option number 1. But then all of the prestige and the reward mechanisms that our society is built upon respond to option number 2. When something bad happens and it gets fixed, there's a reward. When nothing bad happens, there's nothing to fix and nobody gets rewarded, which is a mind-boggling concept to wrap my head around. I don't have a solution for it, but I think it's really important to understand these 2 points. Like I said, intelligent people tend to overcomplicate things. From a young age, we've been indoctrinated to think that it has to be hard if it's going to work. And that's simply not true. So here's some stuff about seatbelts in my way to tell you an easier way to get clients. Okay. So in 1955, 37,000 people died from automobile-related accidents. Now, if you adjust that for today's rate of miles driven, that's 6 times today's rate of how many people die. At that same time, that same year in 1955 was the first year ever that Ford introduced the seatbelt. It was an option to upgrade in your car for $27 and inflation adjusted about $300. It was well known at that point that seatbelts reduced automobile-related deaths by 70%. And yet, in 1955, only 2% of people upgraded to seatbelts. In 1968, all cars were mandated by Congress that they had to be built with seatbelts in them. Every single car had to have a seatbelt. Now, seatbelts aren't very hard to use, are they? All you got to do is go like this, pull it down. Keep in mind that for at least 13 years, it was well known that seatbelts reduced fatalities in automobile-related accidents by 70%. And yet, even though the seatbelts were in the car, there were no rules or laws that said that you had to use them. It was estimated in 1968 that only 15% of people use seatbelts. It took over 50 years for seatbelt usage to raise above 80%. Most humans never change. They like what they like and they do what they do. In some cases, change comes, like in the case of seatbelts, but that change comes agonizingly slow. And so if we're going to sell people things and we want an easier way to sell people things, we have to understand the morbid reality that most people never change. This is a guy named Joel Weldon. He today is a Hall of Fame speaker. He was actually the #1 salesman for the Nightingale Conant Association. So he was the #1 salesman for Earl Nightingale success tapes. Now, to give you an idea of what he used to do, he used to have to cold call people, and he would actually have to sell them a tape recorder at the same time that he was selling them the tapes, because nobody had tapes. So if you want to learn about sales from somebody who had to sell when it was that hard, because they probably know a thing or two. So Joel wasn't always successful. It took him 1,200 calls to make his first sale. And he was complaining to his wife one day, and he said, I'm selling these transformational tapes. People aren't buying them. I need to be mentored. Who's the most successful person that we know? I'd like to speak to them. So his wife says, there's a man named David. He goes to our church. I don't know what he does, but he seems very successful. Something to do with real estate. So Joel calls David. And David comes over, and he says, hey, I'm trying to sell these tapes. Nobody's buying them. Can you help me? David says, play me one. Let me see what you got. Joel turns on one of the tapes. Within 2 minutes, David says, stop. There's more of these. I want them. David didn't just buy one tape. David bought the entire series of tapes. Inflation adjusted, it was over $3,000 worth of tapes. And Joel said, you're the most successful person I know. You don't need these tapes. What are you doing? And he says, David says, I need to be reminded. I need to be reminded. Joel says, I've been calling people who are suffering. I've been calling people who are suffering in their marriages, people who are suffering in their jobs with their fitness, and nobody's buying. Later on, Joel summed up the success that David gave him with this quote. He said, when you're selling success, you call on successful people. When you're selling improvement, you call on people already committed to improvement. If you look in the gym, who are the people already in the gym? It's fit people, isn't it? Already fit people, people already committed to fitness, spend way more money, are way more engaged than people who aren't. It's just the truth. Most people never change. It takes 50 years for people to adopt the use of seatbelts, even. People who buy lots, and people who don't. So trying to convince somebody to change is playing the business on hard mode. Skipping that because most of you have already heard that story. I can send you a podcast with that story if you want. People who hire expensive coaches hire a lot of coaches. People who don't hire expensive coaches don't hire a lot of coaches. And so I believe that the best way to actually tackle this business is not to work forwards from what you want to happen, but to work backwards from something that already good has happened and try to recreate it. And so in doing that, I named this process the marble method. And it really is quite simple. It's based on, if anybody played marbles when they were young, if you lose a marble in the grass, the best way to find it is not to get on your hands and knees in the grass and look for the marble. Instead, it's actually to take another marble, drop it in the general area, and that other marble will find its way to the first marble. And the reason for that is a principle in physics called Occam's razor, the path of least resistance. Marbles are perfectly round. They're going to follow contours often invisible to your eyes in the ground, the same as the first marble did when you lost it. And they're going to find each other. And so what you do here is you take a piece of paper and you write your 10 most valuable people you've ever worked on. This could be in person, this could be in line. And you put them down on one page. If you have a point of sale system, really, really easy, right? The 10 most valuable people. If not, you could probably guess who they are. Like 10 people who have paid you the most amount of money, lifetime value. Then on the other side of that piece of paper, you write down the 10 people who you just liked working with the most. Straight up. Left side is objective, right side is subjective. I've never not done this exercise and had people find 2 or 3. Usually it's 4 or 5 names on both sides of the list. And the reason for that is the people who pay us the most are usually the people we get along with the best because they stick around the longest, or they're doing the thing well and they're getting results from it. So once you have these names, 2, 3, whatever it is, that's when you go really deep. What charities do they support? What magazines do they read? Who do they follow? What other businesses local to them do they participate in? What you're trying to do is you're trying to be a sniper in a world where everybody else is shooting a shotgun with a buckshot method. You're not creating content for the anonymous masses. Instead, you're working backwards from your best people ever that have already proven to you to be the ideal people that you want to work with and that spend a lot of money with you. And you're recreating them. So you might show up at a charity gala because 2 of your clients that are on this list both support that charity. You might figure out the exact massage therapist to work with in your neighborhood. You might find that there are 3 or 4 micro influencers in other fields, not fitness, that these people follow. You might then reach out to that person, offer to train them for free, buy their product, send a review first as a way to build a relationship with them. It's a matter of working backwards. Now, one of the things that comes up whenever I give this talk, particularly to fitness people, is that you can look at any gym and there's a joke that you look at the fit people there and you just say to them, it's like, what are you doing here? You're done, go home. But that's not true, of course. Fit people spend the most amount of money on supplements, on training, on fitness stuff. It doesn't mean, though, that you should only work with fit people. There's different definitions of professional success. There's no right or wrong here. The only thing that I'm pointing out is that there is easier and there is harder. An easier way to get clients, an easier way to build your business is to understand the fact that most people never change and to target people who are already really engaged in fitness and get them to buy your thing. A much harder way is to work with audience who are potentially lower income, inactive, maybe overweight, maybe some sort of special needs. It's not to say that you shouldn't do those things. It can be quite noble and that can lead to a great life. As long as you accept the rules of the game, which simply stated is that it's going to be harder. And that's fine, right? I'm going to skip through this bit on hiring because I think the referrals is going to be more appropriate to you all. But again, if you're interested in the hiring bit, we can get to that. Bodies by Design was a little neighborhood gym that somebody who I know was actually hired in as a marketing consultant for and turned it into a $1 million neighborhood, small neighborhood gym relatively quickly, mostly through referrals. And the way that he did this is through a multi-step process. The first step was they said, where do our members already invest time, energy, and money into their health and fitness outside of this gym? Okay, pretty straightforward. Tanning salons, hairdressers, massage therapy clinics, spas, whatever. They wrote a list, okay? Doesn't have to be a super big list, but like you'd probably think of 9 or 10 of them off the top of your head. The next step was they sent a survey to all of their members. And they said, hey, we're wondering what your favorite tanning salon, hairdresser, massage therapy clinic in the neighborhood is. And they already did the work to pick out like 5 or 6. And then people like checked off whichever was their favorite. Or if they didn't go to any of them, they didn't check anything off. Once they had that, they then reached out to whoever was number 1 in each category with this message. And they said, we asked our members for their favorite spa, and you were number 1. Can we send more people to you? Can we send more people to you? That is a really easy yes, isn't it? For any business. It's not reaching out to a physiotherapist and saying, hey, do you want to work together? Maybe we can send some clients back and forth. It's, we have asked our members who their favorite spa was. You're number 1. I want to send you more business. You're never going to get a no. He then followed up with, awesome. Look, what we're doing is we're putting together a little coupon booklet for all of our members called Our Favorite Places. We're only going to have 1 company in each category. Can you give us some sort of coupon or introductory offer or gift certificate or something that we can pass along to them? They said, of course. They passed it along. My friend put together this booklet. They distributed it to all of their members. They put it out in their front foyer and stuff like that. He then reached out to these same companies and he said, hey, we already share a lot of customers. Would you mind sending out this message to all of your members, to all of your customers? And here's what the message said. It said, we already know a lot of you love Bodies by Design. If you're not already a member, Chris, the owner, wants to pay for your first session. Here's 3 $90 gift certificates for you and 2 of your friends. Now, a few things here that my friend, his name is Giovanni, my friend Giovanni really did well. The first was that he did all of the work for the other business owner. If you want to work with somebody else, you have to do literally all of the work. You can't say send an email. You need to type the email and give it to them. You can't say display this pamphlet at their thing. You have to print it, walk it over there and give it to them. The second thing that he did well is he maintained the value proposition. It wasn't a free session. He gave them a $90 gift certificate. So now people know that a session costs $90. In maintaining that value proposition, he did the third smart thing, which he made it 3 gift certificates. And they're gift certificates, right? So what happened was all of these people started gifting the other 2 to somebody else that they knew. To add fuel to the fire, what Giovanni did is before there was any big gifting season, Mother's Day, Christmas, etc., where he knew that people would often be thinking of the gym, he sent another variation of this message to all of these businesses to send out to these people. And they started passing along the gift certificates. There's 3 rules of referrals from other businesses if you want to work with them. The first is to give before getting. The second is to make it easy for the other business owner. And then the third is to make it compelling for the customer. So episode 198 of my podcast, The Obvious Choice, I go much deeper into referrals. Have a listen there. But I'll tell you one other quick story of referrals, and then I'm going to move on to just some mindset stuff at the end of it, which is Mike Dola, if anybody's familiar with him, started a company called Stronger You, sold it, retired in his 30s. And one of the main things that they did that was so brilliant, they did a lot of things smart, but here's what they did is when somebody had a transformation with them, it was often losing weight. You know, there was some weight gain clients, but it was often losing weight. What he did is his staff would buy them a gift certificate to their favorite clothing store. And then they would encourage them to go to that clothing store with gift certificate and buy new clothes because their old stuff didn't fit anymore. And to celebrate themselves by posting a picture of themselves at the store on social media. Now, not everybody did it, but a lot of people did it. And so what happens, of course, even if these people aren't influencers, they all have their network on social media. Well, they're taking a picture at a clothing store, buying new clothes because their old stuff doesn't fit because they lost weight. You bet your ass they started getting messages saying, how did you do what you just did? And Mike would get referred. Referrals are a social trade. They're not an economic one. And that's where a lot of people get this wrong. They think of referrals or referral gifts like I'm going to give you a gift card if you send me somebody as an economic trade. Instead, it's a social trade. How can you improve somebody's own perceived self-worth? By talking about you. Giving them a gift card to their favorite gift store and encouraging them to post about it on the internet, celebrating themselves. Inserts you in the conversation very naturally, but it makes the client the all-star, which is brilliant. Okay, I'm going to give you a really absurd Canadian example here. When your team's down in a hockey game by a goal, conventional thinking is to pull your goalie with about a minute and a half left. No red-blooded Canadian will ever argue with you on that point. But every single Canadian is wrong, because statistically, you actually should pull your goalie with 6 minutes and 10 seconds left in the game if you're down by 1 goal, 11 minutes if you're down by 2 goals, and somewhere near the end of the second period if you're down by 3 or more goals. And the reason for that is that standing points matter, goals don't at the end of the season. So if you pull your goalie, there's a 4 times increase that you're going to get scored on and only a 0.5 times increase that you're going to score. But if you calculate this out over the course of a season, at the end of the year, if you practice effective goalie pulling management, statistically, your team is going to end up with an extra 4.18 standing points at the end of the season. Because who cares if you get blown out by 5 goals? You get the same 0 points as if you lose by 1. And if you tie the game and go to overtime, you get 1 point. And if you tie the game and win, you get 2 points, don't you? But following misguided conventions and still losing preserves our status. Because this happened. This guy in the picture is Patrick Waugh. He's one of the best goalies of all time. Now he's the coach of the New York Islanders. His team, the Islanders, were down by 2 goals last year. With 11 minutes left, he pulled his goalie. And you want to know what happened? His team got scored on within about 20 seconds. And the media blasted him. The fans were calling for his head. But you know what? He made the right decision. He made the right decision. He gave his team not the best chance to win that game. He gave his team the best chance to place as high in the standings at the end of the season as he could, which is exactly what you should be doing as a coach. But how we judge a good coach and what makes a good coach are similar, but they're not exactly the same thing. Because he can't say our guys tried the hardest, whereas another coach who didn't pull their goalie until there was a minute and 15 seconds left and lost by a goal can stand up proud after the game in the press conference and say to all of the fans, you know, our guys played hard, you know, puck didn't roll our way tonight, we're going to come back tomorrow. And they can keep their status, even though they made a worse decision, even though they were a worse coach. Disagreeability, even when you're objectively correct, feels risky. Nobody you know is going to be impressed if you ignored social media and focused on real life humans for a while. Nobody you know will be impressed if you use social media, but use it how you should actually use it, how it was originally intended to be used, which is to be social, which is to make real connections on there, smaller in number, but higher in value. In our backwards world, what's bad for our ego is often great for a wallet. We've got these competing motivations. The motivations are to make the right decision versus to feel like we can justify our decision if things go wrong. And those are very, very different things. I won't tell you the story how this came to be, but there's a story that has to do with Sesame Street and Elmo that I think is kind of fun. The question that these students at Stanford were asked was originally, how can we make cheap incubators? The question that they came to after all of this work that they should have been asked in the first place, which was, how do incubators keep babies alive? In knowing that, how can we help more babies in the developing world survive? Because when they had the right question, they could figure out the answer relatively quickly. Now, there was a fair bit of chemical engineering for that pouch, but that was a much simpler problem to solve. The issue that we get to is that the more intelligent we get, the more we know, the less we're willing to ask questions. And so from that, a razor is a philosophical device that shaves back the problem to its core essence. And so what I did is I created, based off of all this information, what I call the Sesame Street razor. And the idea behind that is never disguise your hypothesis as the question. Because when you disguise your hypothesis as a question, you're by definition constricting your bands. So the question is not, how do I make better reels on Instagram to get more clients? Your bands are pretty tight. Your bands are pretty constricted. It might be how to leverage media better to get clients. That's a much better question to ask, because then you don't fall prey into the competition, into the comparison that everybody else does. Because if you do the same thing as everybody else, you know, maybe you'll be able to do it so much better that you stand out, but that is a hard game to play. Fortunately, most people are playing that game, and so there's a huge advantage to looking a little bit outside of it. Now, the corollary to the Sesame Street razor is assume the problem has already been solved and work backwards and retrace your steps. That's just one quirk of our brain. Our brains have a much better chance of solving a problem if we assume the problem's already been solved and then retrace our steps than it does trying to build the steps moving forwards. And so if you assume that the problem's already been solved, you can work backwards. This is a line chain that we were talking about before. Easy feels like cheating, hard feels like progress. Easy feels like cheating, hard feels like progress. Why do we choose these harder things? Why do we overcomplicate stuff? It's because if we actually figure out something that works, we don't feel it working because it's easy and that feels like cheating and it feels weird. And so then we tend to mess up everything again by overcomplicating it. If you want better customers, find people already buying a service similar to yours. If you want to hire better, we didn't get into this, but I can talk you through that as well. another time, but you know, when you work backward from the primary attribute you need and you go to where it's already on display. If you want referrals, you design a way for others to feel like they look good by talking about you. It all comes down to the same core tenet, which is people don't change. People who buy lots. People who don't. That's what I got for you. It's weird given I haven't done many presentations via Zoom. It feels really weird. I was like super jerky getting into it at the beginning. Do you guys feel that?
You can't feed off of like the live energy, you know, it's very different.
It's weird. I know people who spend all days doing webinars over Zoom. Not for me, dog. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate you coming. Appreciate your patience. Any questions? Anything you guys want to chat about? I'm in the group. I'm happy to go so deep into all of this stuff. It's so interesting to me. It's made my life so much better in every way, not just financially. And I really hope it does the same for you. So thank you. We'll talk soon.
Amber here. Thanks for listening in. This episode was from a group call from Jonathan's online trainer mentorship, where we host hot seats every 2 weeks. The mentorship is where we take anyone doing from $1,000 to $20,000 a month or more and help them scale up. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in learning more about, please DM the word mentor to Jonathan on Instagram at It's Coach Goodman. If you're looking for another episode to listen to right now, I'd recommend episode 264. Stop playing the look at me shirtless game. It can feel like in order to get attention on social media that you need to go shirtless or sexy. If that's the game that you want to play, awesome. If not, there is another way. In this episode, you'll learn about deciding which game you want to play, are qualified to play, and feels good to you, how not to be rich with likes but poor with dollars, and the reason why you're using social media and how to fix it. Again, that's episode 264. Stop playing the look at me shirtless game. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next week.